Chapter 6 The Source of Mystic Power, the Essence of the Kabbalah. The wisdom of the Kabbalah may be sublime or it may be diabolical, but whatever its values are, one thing is certain, they are utterly confused. The Zohar, our main source of Kabbalistic knowledge, is like an untidy pawn shop, a jumble of trash and articles of value. Here are crowded together and stacked up the cast-off intellectual clothing of many minds, cheap jewelry, base metals thinly plated, gold, silver, copper, and brass. Yet if we delve deep enough among the rubbish which encumbers its shelves, we shall, as we have shown we can, now and again find a pearl of great price. The supernal diadem is there, but it has been broken up, the urge of secrecy having dismembered it and hidden its priceless fragments away in the most unlikely and inaccessible corners. This secrecy has all but defeated its own end by so obscuring truth that in many cases it is no longer discoverable. And when by much searching and labor we do find some precious stone, symbolism has cut it into so many facets that it is all but impossible to judge of its true shape. We look at it from one side and see one thing, then from another and see another, the very brilliance of the symbols confusing us. In chapters I to V we have attempted, and acknowledgedly with but limited success, to project a beam of light into the chaotic lumber rooms of Zoharic learning and illumine what therein lies stored. Nevertheless, we believe that the little we have discovered is of priceless value, because also do we believe much of it to be universally true, offering to the tumultuous years in which we live a key to the door which at present bars us from a completer understanding. Today we wait on the threshold of this door, fearfully gazing out upon a world monstrous and two-headed. Darkness has taken upon itself a political form which has bereft the nations of their sight, has shrouded their minds and blotted out their wisdom, has sown among them the dragon's teeth of war. We stand today at the foot of the Tower of Babel, the tower of class strife and international conflict. Meanwhile light has scintillated forth in science, the boundless Shekinah of this present age. It is girt by no frontier and circumscribed by no class. It shines forth over the north and the south, over the east and the west. Into the heights and into the depths it glows, and yet for the perfection of its creative force it demands that upon its ever-expanding effulgence be cast the shadow of a new human form, the shadow of a humanity in which the physical, the moral, and the intellectual are balanced between the material and the spiritual. What the world demands is a new microcosmic idea, a new fivefold messianic force, a new dispensation of balance which will establish within it a new equilibrium. As science is a universal understanding of things, and as the Kabbalah purports to be the key to universal wisdom, then, if this wisdom fits this understanding, will this key unlock the door before which we blindly stand? What then is there common between science and the Kabbalah? Before answering this question we will attempt to reduce much of what we have as yet tried to explain to its simplest form. 1. Man is a mystery shrouded in a mystery which we call the universe, and this mystery leads us to a yet deeper mystery which we call God or the unknowable. All is a threefold wonder, a relationship between God, man, and the universe. 2. This universe comes from some unknown source and wends its way towards some unknown end. As it comes from dash, appears to be proceeding towards dash, and is in itself dash, its nature, form, and powers can only be described by means of symbols, that is in pictures which in themselves are no more real than a photograph is real when compared to the thing it represents. 3. As symbols are but thoughts set forth in pictorial form which possess no activity, we conclude that the world in which we live, and which in fact is shadowed forth by our thoughts, is no more than one infinite thought form, a form which exists, how is beyond our understanding, in God, or the unknowable, and which finds its activity in our thoughts by being fragmented by our finite minds. 4. To us our thought would be impossible without light, and light would be incomprehensible without darkness, just as heat is incomprehensible without cold. To us, in its ultimate form, the universe is light, it is that which opens the mind of the thinker, which, however, cannot comprehend the existence of light without lack of light. 5. This light reveals to us a universe of 4 dimensions, of 4 worlds in one manifestation, of space, and of time, the former being built up of 3 directions, length, breadth, and thickness. The one encloses or includes the other, and what is beyond this 4-dimensional universe is unknown, if not unknowable. 6. In its turn darkness reveals to us the limitations of human knowledge. Our minds may be compared to fireflies flitting about in the cavern of night. The minute glow which they emit and cast on the void not only shows us how vast is our ignorance, but that all our knowledge can be no more than relatively true, for the mind is finite and the cavern apparently infinite. 7. As all knowledge can be no more than relatively true, that is never free from ignorance, wisdom consists in recognizing this fact and of utilizing knowledge in accordance with circumstances. Understand the circumstances and through knowledge extract light, higher knowledge, from them, this is wisdom, but to use knowledge in order to extract power, the clash between light and darkness, this is magic. 8. Wherever we turn we come up against a threefold order, within man in the form of the physical, moral, and intellectual spheres of his activities, between men in that of justice, culture, and work, between man and the universe, and between man and God, between everything. Nothing in this world is single, not even a thought is single. All things and all thoughts are relative, that is, they are the offspring of a relationship, of an above and of a below. 9. Relativity is, consequently, the secret of deliverance from darkness, therefore it is the road towards the expansion of light. And as light grows, so does thought grow. Consequently, when light has reached its utmost limits, thought will do likewise, and the one thought form will be recreated. This we feel is the ultimate end of the human will, the myriads of fragments of thought re-established in the primal idea. 10. Finally, this transfiguration can only be accomplished through action, that is through will to think or to stop thinking. The world we live in is a world of activity, a conflict between light and darkness. Knowledge and ignorance, good and evil. It is a whirling energy, nebular force, stellar force, planetary force, human force. It is a world of perpetual revolutions, a cosmos, a chaos, a void, the spark of a new thought, and then once again a cosmos, a chaos, and a void, the shadow of a dead thought. Nature abhors a vacuum, hence life is the plenitude which fills it, a plenitude which of necessity can never stand still. Each true thought, a thought full of light, which flashes on the darkness which surrounds it, is a Christ unto this world. When three such thoughts, one in the physical realm, one in the moral, and one in the intellectual, simultaneously flash forth, then is a messianic age begotten. It is this threefold deliverance which the world awaits, a deliverance and transfiguration which can only come from within. Such in brief are some of the main doctrines of the Kabbalah reduced to their simplest terms and translated into easily understandable language. From them we will turn to the scientific conceptions of today and will show that between these two systems of thought there are certain similarities. The mysticism of modern science. The science of today represents, in more than one way, what the scientist of 50 years ago would have called chaos. The law of causation is to disappear, conservation of energy is to disappear, uniformity is to disappear, determinism is to be replaced by probabilities, and law by chance. The law of the rationalists of the 19th century was at least something which the mind of man could grip onto. It symbolized order, if not love, but chance symbolizes neither. To the common mind chance is something blind, an eyeless force, a kind of omnipotent cyclops aimlessly tumbling through time and space, to whom the harmony of the spheres means nothing, a sightless gambler who shuffles the lives of men and casts them upon the table of fate, not to play with, but merely to pick them up again and reshuffle the pack. Surely man himself is within himself superior to this, the latest symbolic emanation of truth. The old struggle with the rationalist conception of the world was how to find a place for freedom in a world where all things were determined by law. The new struggle with the mathematicians would appear to be how to find a place for authority and order in a world of pure chance or pure accident, that is of complete freedom. The one series of symbols led us to a mechanistic world conception. The world is a vast machine, the other leads us to one which can best be compared to a dice box, accident, luck, odds on or against. In both, however, the exalted engineer and the supreme gambler remain unexplained, hence there is hope that the present symbols are not final ones, but those only which appeal to a small priesthood as exclusive as the priests of ancient Eleusis. Are these scientific speculations nothing more than symbols? Yes, as to this there can be no doubt. They are not truth, for at most they are but the reflections of truth upon the mind of a mathematician, just as the symbols of the first chapter of Genesis were the reflections of truth upon the mind of some early poet, living not in a mathematical civilization, but in a pastoral one. Sir James Jeans, who has done so much to popularize the hidden meanings of present-day science, openly acknowledges this. He tells us that, whilst formerly the scientist looked upon the world as a collection of hard bits, today he looks upon it as a collection of electrical waves. These are, he says, of two kinds, bottled-up waves, which we call matter, and unbottled waves, which we call radiation of light. These waves only exist in our minds, for they are nothing more than mental pictures of a reality which exists outside the mind, that is beyond the power of thought. Their existence is so completely nebulous that, as Sir James Jeans says, the making of models or pictures to explain mathematical formulae and the phenomena they describe, is not a step towards, but a step away from, reality. It is like making graven images of a spirit. In fact they cannot be named as tangible things are named, cat, cat, table, table, etc., etc., but merely numbered in a symbolical way as mathematical or, to all intents and purposes, as metaphysical quantities. In that fascinating book The Mysterious Universe, Professor Jeans writes, if annihilation of matter occurs, the process is merely that of unbottling imprisoned wave energy, and setting it free to travel through space. These concepts reduce the whole universe to a world of light, potential or existent, so that the whole story of its creation can be told with perfect accuracy and completeness in the 6 words, God said, let there be light. Here, mysteriously, perhaps inevitably, the latest symbols of the creation of the universe in which we live harmonize with those which flashed upon the mind of man thousands of years ago. What has caused this extraordinary change between the scientific outlook of the present century and that of the last? The answer is largely to be discovered in the theory of relativity, which is but another name for the threefold conception, the relationship between two facts as it appears in their resultant. For instance, the resultant of pressure and resistance is the only means at our disposal of understanding pressure and resistance. If there is no resultant, then pressure and resistance are non-existent to us. Formerly this globe of ours was considered to be part of a three-dimensional universe, or space, floating through time. Now time has been added to it as the fourth dimension, and the volume thus conceived is described as a continuum. The relationship is therefore no longer that of ourselves and space and time, but that of ourselves and the continuum in which time is an integral factor. Today man is no longer faced as he was a couple of centuries ago by a universe of 4 elements, but instead by a universe of 4 dimensions, od, he, va, he, in a more all-embracing form, which with himself complete the modern idea of the microcosm. To Sir James Jeans, in spite of the fact, as he says, that we have no language at our command except that derived from our terrestrial concepts and experiences, scientific speculations lead to the supposition that the universe appears to have been designed by a pure mathematician, for a Kabbalistic assumption. And what does this mean? It means that science, which during the last century broke away from the idealistic conceptions of religion, the spiritual side of man, is today tending towards a return to these concepts, for, as this scientist says, we may think of the electrons as objects of thought, and time as the process of thinking. The universe can be best pictured, though still very imperfectly and inadequately, as consisting of pure thought. 5. Here we return to an idealism which would have staggered the imagination of most of the scientists of half a century ago, but which will be readily accepted by every Kabbalist, and would have been accepted by such as a supreme truth even 2,000 years ago. And outside the Kabbalah, this idealism logically brings us back to Bishop Berkeley, the greatest of the idealistic philosophers since Plato. Over 200 years ago he wrote, "All the choir of heaven and furniture of earth, in a word all those bodies which compose the mighty frame of the world, have not any substance without mind. So long as they are not actually perceived by me, or do not exist in my mind, or in that of any other created spirit, they must either have no existence at all, or else subsist in the mind of some eternal spirit, the Ion." Quoting these remarkable words of this most remarkable philosopher, Sir James says, "Modern science seems to me to lead, by a very different road, to a not altogether dissimilar conclusion. Because of our different line of approach we have reached the last of the above three alternatives first, and the others appear unimportant in comparison. It does not matter whether objects exist in my mind, or in that of any other created spirit, or not, their objectivity arises from their subsisting in the mind of some eternal spirit." 6. This eternal spirit, being the organ of creative thought, must be something superior to, or certainly other than, the continuum or four-dimensional universe in which we live, for this continuum exists only in his thought, just as we are in ourselves superior to our own thoughts, for we are the creators of them and live in the shadow world created by them. This spirit must be something which may be called reality, or truth, the macrocosm or macroprosopis, concerning which the human reason can only form symbolical pictures, reflections in a mirror. We will attempt to explain this in a simpler way. Supposing we could not raise our heads and look at the sun, we could nevertheless examine it indirectly by gazing into a looking glass placed at our feet. In it we should see a reflection of the sun, the only solar reality possible to us in the circumstances, but it would not be the reality of the sun itself, any more than our image in a mirror is ourself. In fact, such an image is in a way upside down, as our right side becomes our left and vice versa. As long as we kept our eyes fixed on the looking glass, though we should know something about the sun, we should in fact know very little. At times its image would appear and at times vanish, according to the motion of the earth, the state of the atmosphere, or on account of an eclipse. So erratically would its image come and go that we might well say that its movements were directed by chance. Yet if we could only raise our eyes, we should soon discover the reasons why all this was so. The fact is, as Sir James Jeans says, many would hold that, from the broad philosophical standpoint, the outstanding achievement of 20th century physics is not the theory of relativity with its welding together of space and time, or the theory of quanta with its present apparent negation of the laws of causation, or the dissection of the atom with the resultant discovery that things are not what they seem. It is the general recognition that we are not yet in contact with ultimate reality. To speak in terms of Plato's well-known simile, we are still imprisoned in our cave with our backs to the light, and can only watch the shadows on the wall. At present the only task immediately before science is to study these shadows, to classify them and explain them in the simplest possible way. 7 scientists are, therefore, concerned in explaining the shadows of reality in terms of the rational symbols of today, just as the Kabbalists were concerned in explaining them in terms of the rational, then theological and non-scientific, symbols of their day. Like the Kabbalist, the scientist can lead us up to the threshold of the symbolic temple of God, this world and universe defined and explained by science, knowledge, but on account of the limitations of the instrument he uses, namely rational thought, he cannot lead us into it. To enter it we need something, a faculty, which transcends the reason. In the example we have above given of examining the sun by means of a looking glass because we are unable to raise our heads, this inability may be compared to rational thought, and the raising of our heads to that higher faculty which will enable us to open, as it were, spiritual eyes, and see not only the shadows of reality but reality itself. Since the beginning of written history very little progress has been made in the intellectual interpretation of the mysteries, which stood shrouded before the academies of Aristotle and Plato. Many things have changed, innumerable experiments have been made, yet before the essential mysteries we still stand as blindly as they did. All that has in reality happened is that we have changed our forms of thought. Then they were flatter, now they are rounder. Each new philosophy opens like a fairy tale, for man is ever, and of necessity must be, a wondering child. There is a man or a woman in a wishing ring, an unannihilatable atom of magic. The ring is turned and man sees something which does not exist, but which is so remarkable that he persists that it does exist. He is forever creating the hollow worlds of the kings of Edom. Today we laugh at Kabbalistic learning. Why? Because it is out of place and out of time. Tomorrow we shall laugh at the scientific theories of today and for similar reasons. If the universe is really four-dimensional, and certainly it appears to be so, then we are living not on a sphere but on the skin of a hypersphere which we can only explain by means of mathematical symbols. What is a 4? We cannot even draw a picture of it. Yet we are told, by those we cannot contradict, that Einstein's universe contains matter but no motion and de Sitter's contain motion but no matter. 8. On one side, motionless matter, and on the other, matterless motion, yet that Einstein's universe will end in de Sitter's and de Sitter in what amounts to 0. 9. Here surely, we are not very distant from the Kabbalah, because undifferentiated sameness and nothingness tend coincide. Examine the following exposition. To the pure geometer the radius of curvature of space-time is an incidental characteristic, like the grin of the Cheshire cat. To the physicist it is an indispensable characteristic. It would be going too far to say that to the physicist the cat is merely incidental to the grin. Physics is concerned with interrelatedness such as the interrelatedness of cats and grins. In this case the cat without a grin and the grin without a cat are equally set aside as purely mathematical fantasies. 11. In a spherical universe, if you gaze in any direction long enough, that is if you gaze for 6,000 million years, you will see the back of your head. 12. But fortunately we are spared this experiment because a perfectly spherical world is a mathematical invention. 13. So also do we conclude are all other worlds fashioned out of thought forms, whether mathematical, religious or whatnot in shape. They are all shadows, all in substance illusionary. Pope said in his Dunciad, see mystery to mathematics fly. Still the keystone is mystery. To the Kabbalist the number 137 is a number of a complete book of mysteries. Kabbalah HLBQ equals 5 plus 30 plus 2 plus 100 equals 137. From the Ein Sof to the 3 supernal Sephiroth and thence to the 7 inferior spheres it symbolizes the entire universe, but to the astronomer it is the value of the fine structure constant. 14. Something very different, nevertheless something equally mysterious. Yet to scoff at science would be foolishness, just as it is foolishness to scoff at any honest idea. Science is a means to an end, the knowledge of shadows. So also is the Kabbalah, though it looks at the mystery from a different angle of thought. When the Kabbalist says, as above so beneath, and when the scientist says, to measure the mass of an electron, a suitable procedure is to make astronomical observations of the distances and velocities of spiral nebulae. 15. These angles all but coincide. And when the Kabbalist postulates no thingness as the beginning of every thingness, and the scientist says, the beginning seems to present insuperable difficulties unless we agree to look on it as frankly supernatural. 16. Coincidence is absolute, for in both reality remains impenetrable, and like Bottom's dream all that is derived from this supreme zero is without bottom. It is the pit of activities which the Kabbalists frequently call hell. The laboratory of Satan. In the world we see a ceaseless struggle entailing change, birth, formation, growth, decay, and death. A ceaseless evolution and dissolution surround us in which everything seems to be possessed of a dual nature and to be urged onwards or backwards by a clash of dual powers. Thus far the duality which lies at the foundation of Kabbalistic philosophy appears rational enough. Yet reason cannot tell us whether this duality is the ultimate end, or whether it emanates from unity or from nothingness. Reason is a wonderful ladder which enables us to climb towards the ceiling of the intellectual world, but it does not enable us to penetrate it and to see beyond. This ceiling and all which is contained beneath it belong to the realm of science, which arranges and rearranges the furniture from time to time. Beyond and above is another room, the super-scientific, the super-rational, perhaps a space which is no conceivable room at all. Man, however, has never been content with purely rational answers, for he is possessed by what may be called a spiritual discontent, which is unsatisfied with all scientific arguments, and which has been both an assistant and resistant to scientific growth. The rationalist says that the answer to A and B is X, the theologian says, no, it is Y, and between the beliefs and disbeliefs of both has the intellectual world expanded from out of wonders to what we call facts. Yet, however firmly these facts may be founded upon reason, there remains always a doubt. Within the circumference of this doubt lie all religious systems, and its center, where all doubt ends, is called God. To a highly intellectual and speculative mind God is a mystery subject only to symbolic explanation, but to the crude, sensuous masses of mankind he and his symbols are one. To the first he is a metaphysical ideal, to the second, a physical fact. As from the Kabbalistic mind is evolved an androgynous being whose very existence depends upon the balance of passive and active forces, similarly from the primitive mind of the masses is evolved an anthropomorphic deity who can accomplish good and evil, and who consequently is to be loved and feared. As the mystical atom Cadman is the measure of the one, so is the physical atom, that is man himself, the measure of the other. As the one is explained by symbols, the other is asserted in words. Between the mystical and the superstitious there is consequently a close relationship, and as man, whether mystical or superstitious, lives in one and the same world, both see God in nature but from different intellectual angles. The religion of the masses has never changed in essence, for it has always been nature worship in one form or another. Life eternal is but a prolongation of life terrestrial, the soul, of the personality, heaven is but a super-happy home and hell but an infra-abominable jail. Everywhere and in every land we find the same ideas dressed in different garments, the same gods and goddesses of chaos and order, of love and death, of hatred and life, of fertility, of dawn, of night, etc., etc. From such is built up the normal religious mood of the masses. Nevertheless there is yet another mood, for from time to time in the world's history something happens, a man appears, be he prince or pauper, who throws the masses into such a state of religious fervor that all reason and with it all doubt is obliterated and a spiritual condition is produced which closely resembles physical drunkenness. Such men were Orpheus, Oedipus, Osiris, Zoroaster, Krishna, Odin, Buddha, Christ, Muhammad, and a host of lesser names, mythological and historical, many of which have passed into oblivion. For a time these men have lifted the multitudes out of nature, endowing them with a spiritual instinct, a ketheric nefesh, more powerful than all their natural instincts combined. Self-preservation, self-sacrifice, self-assertion, pugnacity, love, hate, fear, greed, and all the other instincts in man in an instant become slaves to this tyrant. The people are in fact filled with a god, for what the master says is the voice of the deity. Yet his words cannot explain his illuminating vision, for all they can do is to translate the super-rational into the rational, that is to render comprehensible the incomprehensible form which he himself can grasp only symbolically. These words are drawn from his sentiments, nefesh, and his intellect, ruach, and not from his spirit, neshama, and should his sentiments be gross and his intellect crude, then will his symbols be gross and crude and so will be the words whereby he attempts to explain them. This brings us back to the opening words of this chapter. It does not matter what an intellectual man or woman may think of the wisdom of the Kabbalah, he or she may say, well, if these people like to symbolize God as a satanic force, let them, it is their business and not mine. This is tolerant enough, but it avoids the danger without removing it, which is that should a Kabbalist attain to so potent a vision that he can detonate the spiritual instinct of the masses, will he not, because of his education, make use of a satanic symbology which, literally accepted by his intoxicated followers, will spiritually turn them upside down and impel them towards the most diabolical acts of anarchy and outrage? The likelihood of this is common knowledge, for the power of the demagogue is well known, and the most dangerous of demagogues is he who is fervently narrow in his opinions or faith, that is, single-minded. How much more, then, is he who believes that his voice is God's voice, the veritable logos, God being symbolized to him according to what his sentiments, intellect, and education make him, and God to his listeners being fashioned according to their level of intelligence. If the symbols are accepted as realities by his followers, and if his darkness, lit by his spiritual frenzy, finds a sympathetic and passive partner in their ignorance and animality, the chaos of his would-be cosmos, then the child of this union will not be Lucifer, the intellectual Satan, but Belial, his sensuous or clophothic counterpart. Then will the surroundings of his followers be turned into a physical hell. It was for this reason that the Kabbalists locked away their secrets from the uninitiated, and that every other truly religious cult has done the same, for the Spirit of God cannot be reflected upon chaos except as a broken, jagged, and turbulent star of light which maddens its watchers in place of illumining them. This, we are of opinion, will be accepted by most thinkers, though many will refuse to differentiate between the demagogue and the religious master, because the power of both these soul troublers varies in degree. This is so, yet this variance opens up an important problem, namely, why does it vary? We know that in the material world conviction depends on one or more of the three spheres of power, the physical, sensuous, and the intellectual, and that this mastership stands beyond good and evil because it is a power for good and evil. A skilled craftsman may use his energy and talents for the benefit or detriment of mankind, and so also a skilled demagogue or a skilled philosopher. Is not a similar process also applicable to the spiritual sphere, granted that there is such a sphere? And if this be not granted, then some abnormal intellectual or sensuous sphere must be assumed. To us the threefold order is not alone patent to the Kabbalah, but is an obvious rational conception. We know that we are composed of matter, but matter plus something we call our ego. We know that we are living matter, and that the earth we come from is not living matter in the sense that we are. We infer, therefore, that as the earth is one thing and as we are partly earth and partly something else, this something else is another thing, and further still that in all probability we are a link between these two things which can only consciously manifest in ourselves, but which nevertheless may exist apart from us as a material and a spiritual world or, when united in perfect equilibrium, form God. Accepting these possibilities, which are not far removed from the doctrines of the Kabbalah, then if any one of us could by some process or another know as much about the spiritual world and its possible spheres of power as we know about the material world, surely such a spiritualized person would possess a stupendous power over his less enlightened fellow men, always granted that there is something spiritual within them. It is the source of this spiritual or magnetic force which we will now inquire into. The mystical ordeal. There is a spiritual or mystical ordeal, not necessarily order, which all great religious masters have passed through, and Kabbalistically it is fully described in the 32nd chapter of Genesis. 17 in it we read, and Jacob the rose up that night, and took his 2 wives the 2 Hes, also the pillars of the temple, Jachin and Boaz and his 11 sons the conjunction of the 5 and 6 pointed stars, the microcosm, and macrocosm, also the Van and He final, which symbolize purification through the balancing of opposites, and passed over the ford Jabbok the veil of the abyss which separates the 7 lower Sephiroth from the 3 supernal ones. And Jacob was left alone in meditation, being cut off from the lower emanations, and there wrestled a man the Od with him until the breaking of the day, the vision of the Shin. And he the man, Od said, let me go, for the day break. The Od fearing that if the sun rose, namely the Shin, his identity as the potential tetragrammaton would be lost in the emanation of YHSHVH, and his dominion would thus come to an end. And he Jacob said, I will not let thee go, except thou bless me unite with me, which he can only do through the 2 wives the Odhe and the 7 lower Sephiroth. And he said unto him, What is thy name? And he said, Jacob. And he said, Thy name shall be called no more Jacob, but Israel, for as a prince hast thou power with God and with men as above so beneath and hast prevailed attained to the spiritual vision. Jacob then asks of him his name, but the wrestler is silent because his name cannot be pronounced. And Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, for I have seen God face to face and my life reason is preserved. This ordeal, it will be seen, is of a threefold nature. First, the aspirant must equilibrate all the opposite forces within him, and not merely those he considers vicious. Secondly, he must cut himself away from all outward things and influences and meditate on the spirit he desires to unite with. Thirdly, he must persevere, that is wrestle with this spirit. These 3 acts will lead him to the vision of God, the world soul, a spark of which burns within him and differentiates him from and also unites him to all things which surround him. Whilst this vision lasts he is the Messiah, but once it has faded away he is again man, yet charged with a terrific power which according to his will is a power for good or for evil. The existence and possible employment of this force constitute the great secret of practical magic. It is the wand of thaumaturgy and the key of black magic. It is the Edenic serpent who transmitted to Eve the seductions of a fallen angel. The astral light warms, illuminates, magnetizes, attracts, repels, vivifies, destroys, coagulates, separates, breaks and conjoins everything under the impetus of powerful wills. God created it on the first day, when he said, Let there be light. This force of itself is blind but is directed by egregores, that is, by chiefs of souls, or, in other words, by energetic and active spirits. 18 So writes Eliphaz Levi. These egregores are those who tower above the flock, who are so excellent and distinguished that their wisdom frequently appears to be folly to mankind or else is accepted blindly. The world fools, or world sages, attain to something which is extraordinary in its nature and which, when they attempt to reveal it to those unworthy to receive it, renders them magicians, their actions being tinged not only by their mental, moral, and physical characteristics, but also by those of their recipients. Thus we obtain 2 classes of mysteries or of magic, the white and the black. The 4th dimension. To the source of mystic power we will now give another name in order to bring it more closely into touch with the ideology of today. We will call it the 4th dimension. Here we have no up or down in the common meaning of these words, for up and down are attributes of the 3-dimensional space in which we consciously live, and to 4-dimensional consciousness this space and all it contains is nothing more than a mathematical abstraction, a mere notion of the mind. In spite of the immateriality of the 3-dimensional world when viewed from a 4-dimensional position, it is possible, as we shall show later on, for a 3-dimensional being to establish contact with this source of mystic power, that is to tap it, but once it is tapped it is only possible for the recipient to make use of this power in accordance with his 3-dimensional nature. Consequently many of the great religious teachers have insisted on the absolute necessity of their disciples purifying themselves, so that when they attain to the mystic power it may find an equilibrated habitation. For instance, morality, though a gate to the spiritual life, is in no sense its sanctuary, for it is but one of the 3 great gates, equilibrium of body, heart, and mind. The reason why such innumerable disputes and persecutions have arisen out of the teachings of so many of the masters is that they have considered morality, and frequently sexual morality, as the only gate and the only end. Misunderstanding the meaning of moral equilibrium, which demands a balancing of all the moral and so-called immoral forces, and not a suppression of any one category of them, they have so completely contorted the 3-dimensional medium that when it receives the mystic power a diabolical state is created. Some have gone so far as to command their followers to neglect and macerate their bodies, and others have asserted that the intellect must be annihilated in order to create a vacuum for the onrush of the spirit. The dreadful consequence is that these errors do not prevent attainment, in fact, in many cases they hasten it by cutting down resistance. But what kind of attainment do they lead to? The vision of X, the unknown God, on entering a balanced medium or body, becomes the logos, but when it enters an unbalanced body it becomes the anti-logos. True, in both cases the fire brought down from heaven is identically the same fire, but according to the medium it inhabits it illumines or blinds. Those attracted towards this 4-dimensional state are such as Eliphaz Levi calls the energetic and active spirits, that is individuals possessing strong 3-dimensional powers, a deep insight into good and evil, the positive and negative currents of life. As beneath, so above, it consequently follows that mundane force is attracted by spiritual force, that the stronger the currents of life the more they are drawn towards the currents of that which created life. And as the mundane force cannot exist without evil, any more than an electrical current can exist without negative electricity, the terrible danger is that spiritual power, like dynamite, can either blast the rock from which the temple is to be built or blast the temple which is already built and into which this highest of explosives is offloaded. Mystic power is diabolical as well as divine, according to circumstances. The object of attainment is greater knowledge, understanding, and wisdom of the reality of existence, the who behind the these. This wisdom in itself cannot assist mankind, though it may utterly change the life of the recipient. It is not the spirituality of the recipient which will tell him how to utilize the power he is charged with, but his intellect is knowledge, understanding, and wisdom of mankind, that is the mundane shadows of the supernal realities. A physician who discovers some powerful drug would rightly be considered mad were he to administer it to his patients irrespective of their ailments. So also is an adept mad, possessed by Satan, if he attempts to do likewise with his spiritual drug. Worse still, he turns his patients mad and the world becomes a raving hell. This higher wisdom is a forward impulse of the three-dimensional wisdom, which is a compound of good and evil, the opposite or complementary forces. It is a forward impulse of the will, but with this difference, that whilst in the three-dimensional world a man normally makes use of virtue to enhance virtue and of vice to enhance vice, that is things built upwards, an individual who has experienced the four-dimensional vision, on his re-entering three-dimensional consciousness, sees things upside down. Consequently it happens that, unless his intellect has, as in a telescope, been provided with a lens which will reverse the object, he will affirm with all the frenzy of religious faith that the world is standing upon its head. As he knows, three-dimensionally, that the world should stand on its feet, and as he believes, four-dimensionally, that this reversion is necessary to salvation, he will in actual fact turn the world upside down in order to attain his end. To him in his higher wisdom virtue and vice are equivalents, for both are illusions when compared to reality. Therefore, according to his nature, he desires to establish reality in the three-dimensional world, and if by nature he is vicious he will attempt to transmute good into evil, and, if virtuous, evil into good. In both cases he will be attempting the impossible. Should he, however, have equilibrated the good and evil qualities of his three-dimensional nature before attaining to the vision of the fourth, knowing that all conscious conceptions are illusionary, after attainment he will remain silent and radiate forth spirituality in place of making graven images of its source. To will, to dare, to know, and to remain silent are the four supreme powers of the Magus, and the fourth is the divine synthesis of the preceding three. Those who attain to the fourth, the final letter of the divine name, are the leaders of light, the man Jacob who wrestled with Tetragrammaton at the ford of Jabbok and who did not attempt to pronounce his name. Those who attain to the first three only are like Jason, who cast the cubic stone of the wise into the midst of the host of warriors. Unbalanced forces, who at once turned upon one another in anarchy. Not one of the great historical religious masters was a true Messiah, because no man, however sublime may be his nature, can redeem mankind. There is no shortcut to heaven, for mankind will find deliverance only when it creates the power which can deliver it, and when it does so, then spontaneously will the Messianic age be born. Of all these masters, probably the sublimest was Gautama Buddha, because he refused to discuss the soul, the nature of God, and the joys of heaven. He said, "Think rightly, act rightly, live rightly, and deliverance will be revealed to you." He did not say, "Accept my thoughts, my words, my life, and salvation is yours." He spoke in parables and locked up the mysteries in his heart, for he understood the sublimity of the true logos, the unspoken word.